welcome to CEC Online Lectures. Myself Aditya P. Tripathi, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Shamlal College, Evening, University of Delhi. Dear students, this is going to be part 3 of my lectures on standard costing, and in that series we have been talking about material variances, which means we are talking about the first component of standard costing, that is variance analysis. And this is going to be part 3 of that lecture. So today I'll be talking about how to calculate the material variances under different circumstances. Before I start my numerical problem, I start taking up a numerical question. Let me recapitulate what we have discussed in the previous lecture. We talked about material cost variances, how to calculate it. Material cost variance is equal to standard cost minus actual cost. And then we justified the material cost variance with the price variance and usage variance, which means that it is going to be justified by the sum total of price variance and usage variance. Or in other words, we can say that when I'm calculating material cost variance, I'm actually telling you that it is the function of two possible reasons. One may be the price variance, the other may be usage variance. So with that idea in mind, or you can say with that conceptual understanding of material variances in mind, we are going to solve another question of material variances, just in order to make you understand in a better way that how to solve a question which is on material variances. So let's have a look at another question. This is going to be problem number 2 in this particular series. The question is here in front of you. It is standard material cost for manufacturing 1000 units of output is 400 kilograms of material, and the price is 2.50 per kilograms. So the question is giving you the standard material cost for manufacturing 1000 units of output is 400 kilograms of material. Or in other words, you can say to have an output of 1000 units, you require 400 kilograms of material, and the price, the standard price for it is 2.50 per kg. The second para of the question reads like this, that when 2000 units are produced, it is found that the actual cost is 2.70 per kg for using 825 kilograms of material. So the second para is telling you about the actual production, that you have produced 2000 units and it is found that the actual cost is 2.70 per kg for using 825 kilograms of material. Further, the question is asking you to calculate material variances. So with this very question, you must have understood that what we have to do. We are provided with the standard combination of standard cost of material, the combination between input and output the question provides. The standard price of material is also given. The actual price and the actual units consumed, they are also given. And we are asked to calculate what material variances. Now, unlike the previous question where the question was clearly mentioning us to calculate material cost variances, price variance and usage variance, the question here is asking you to calculate material variances. So without having any kind of confusion that what we have to calculate, we should be sure that we have to calculate all three variances, that is price variance, cost variance and usage variance. So with this understanding, let us solve this particular question so that we can increase our understanding of this particular topic called material variances. So let's calculate material cost variance. You know the formula, standard cost minus actual cost. This is the formula for material cost variance. So we have to put the value in the formula so that we can get the material cost variance. So we'll be calculating material cost variance, standard cost minus actual cost. We have to calculate first standard cost for actual production, that whatever is my actual production, for that I'll be calculating standard cost. Units of raw material required, question says that 400 kilograms you require for 1000 kilograms, you are producing 2000 kilograms, so you require how many units? 800 units. So 800 units of raw material you require. Standard cost is given per kilogram, the price is given 2.50. Standard units for actual production is 800 units. When we multiply, we get a value of rupees 2000. So this is going to be my standard cost. So in this way we have computed standard cost for actual production. Now my dear students, here I would like to clarify, or I would like to take a pause just to make you understand that this is the point where most of the students commit mistake. You have to understand that you are supposed to calculate standard cost for actual output. So in this question also, the question is giving you standard for some other units. standard for some given level of production. It is not given for the actual production. So you have to apply that standard for your actual level of production, just like we have applied here, to calculate the standard cost for actual production. And in this way I have computed the standard cost for my actual production. So standard cost for actual production is rupees 2000. The next step is computation of actual cost, so that we can compute the variances. Material cost variance, actual cost of production. Actual production is given 2000 units. Actual units of raw material used given in the question, it is 825 units. Actual price of raw material given in the question, rupees 2.70. Since we are provided with both the components, that is actual units of material consumed along with the actual price of raw material, we have to simply multiply. The actual cost comes to be 825 units into 2.70, and the value becomes 2227.50. So in this way we have got the actual cost as well. And once we have computed the standard cost and actual cost, the next step is to calculate the material cost variance. And it is quite simple because we know the formula. We have started our discussion with the formula that material cost variance is equal to standard cost minus actual cost. We have computed both the standard cost as well as actual cost. So very easily we can find out the variance, the difference between the standard cost and actual cost. It is 2000 is my standard cost and 2227.5 is my actual cost. Now remember, my dear students, here also your actual cost is greater than that of standard cost. So your value, your variance comes in negative, and negative means adverse. So we'll be writing 227.50 rupees, and that is adverse. So my material cost variance comes to be adverse. It's not favorable, it's not neutral, because my actual cost is greater than that of standard cost. Once it is computed, now we have to justify this by computing subsequent two variances, that is the price variance and usage variance. And remember, as I told you earlier also, that the sum total of price variance and usage variance should be equal to material cost variance. So once material cost variance is computed, the next step is to compute material price variance. So let's go ahead with computation of material price variance. The formula we know, the formula is standard price minus actual price into actual quantity. Since we are computing material price variance, so under bracket we have to take the difference between the two prices, standard price and actual price, into actual quantity. Standard price given in the question is 2.50 rupees and actual price given is 2.70. So actual price is greater than that of your standard price, and actual quantity consumed is 825 kilograms. Now we'll be multiplying it with the difference, that is 0.20 negative, and that comes to be rupees 165 adverse. Now remember, my dear students, why I am writing adverse here, cause actual price of material is greater than that of standard price. So wherever actual is greater than standard in terms of my cost, I would say that this is going to increase my cost, so it is adverse for me. So this 165 rupees adverse is my material price variance. The next step is to calculate material usage variance. And it is quite easy for us to calculate material usage variance once we have understood the price variance formula. The format remains the same. The only difference is the price is replaced by the quantity and quantity is replaced by the price. So let's have a look at the formula. Material usage variance is equal to standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price. Standard quantity given is 800 rupees. Actual quantity is 825. So the difference is 25 negative, because actual quantity is greater than that of standard quantity, and standard price is 2.50. So usage variance comes to be 25 units into 2.50, and I would say that it is 62.5 rupees adverse. So my dear students, try to understand, my usage variance is also coming adverse. The reason is the actual quantity consumed is greater than that of the standard quantity. Since I am consuming the greater quantity of this particular material for consumption, for producing this given output or this given product, I am consuming greater quantity as compared to the standard levels. That is why I would say that my usage variance is also coming adverse. So once we have computed the price variance and usage variance, now it is the time to justify the material cost variance, the computation of material cost variance. Now we'll be justifying it. Material cost variance is justified by the sum total of material price variance and usage variance. Price variance as we have cost variance as we have computed 227.50 adverse. price variance I just computed rupees 165 adverse, and usage variance is 62.50 adverse. Once we have computed it, remember the sum total of price variance and usage variance is supposed to be equal to material cost variance, and when we make a total of it, it becomes 227.50 adverse on the left hand side, and the same value comes on the right hand side, that is rupees 227.50 adverse. So in this way we have once again computed this particular material cost variance, and we have also justified the answer. So by this computation, you must have understood that for computing material cost variance, what is the process which we are supposed to follow. You must have understood the process, because the understanding the process is very important. Once it is understood, you can go ahead, you can go with the second level of computation, where we have to further justify the usage variance by computing the material mix variance and yield variance. And that is the point which I am going to take up from this point onwards. So henceforth we'll talk about not only justifying the cost variance by computing price and usage variance, but we'll also calculate the material mix variance and yield variance to justify the usage variance. Remember, mix variance can only be calculated when we are using more than one type of material into our production process. So if it is there, we'll compute material mix variance, or otherwise we'll only compute material yield variance for justifying usage variance. So to understand what we do into the justification of usage variance, that is computing yield variance and mix variance, let's try to understand what is the formula which we are going to use. If I talk about material usage variance, again I am repeating, it is the sum total of material mix variance and yield variance. Now I'll be starting with the explanation of material mix variance. What is material mix variance? Let's first discuss that what is mix variance. As the term itself indicates, that we are talking about some proportion or some mix of material. Suppose if in my production process I am using more than one type of material. Suppose I am using two different types of material named A and B for producing a product called C. So there is a product called C for which I am using the raw material of A and B. So obviously I have to make use of a given proportion of A and B, and that proportion is nothing but the mix of these two items. So we have to understand, for both the raw materials, for both the types of raw material, we must be having our set standard. So either will be we might have used the standard, we might have followed the standard, or we might not have followed the standard. So in both the situations, if we have followed the standard, if standard proportion is exactly equal to actual, then there is no problem. But if there is some variance, that variance need to be accounted for, and for that only we are computing material mix variance, so that we can understand that is there any difference between the proportion of these two or more than two types of raw materials which we are using for producing a given level of product. So for that particular finished goods, whatever raw material we are using, that is something for which we have to understand that what is the ideal or the standard proportion of these two material, and whether it has been followed or not, whether it has been complied with or not. So for that we actually compute material mix variance. Now the question comes, what is the formula for material mix variance? For material mix variance, the formula is revised standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price. Now here you are introduced with a completely new term called revised standard quantity. My dear students, here I'll first explain you what is revised standard quantity, and then I'll tell you the two different ways of calculating RSQ or revised standard quantity. Let me first start with the formula. Formula is revised standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price. Actual quantity you know, standard price you know, standard price of material, actual quantity you understand. Now what is revised standard quantity? My dear students, when we are computing material mix variance, our focus must be completely on finding out the variation or variance in terms of mix only. So we'll not be looking into other matters. We'll only think about or focus about the mix, the proportion of two or more than two types of raw material which is being used for this particular product which I am going to produce. So In revised standard quantity, it is quite simple to calculate. I'm just telling you what we do. We actually revise the standard quantity. Whatever actual units are consumed, suppose for A and B, we are using 1000 units of raw material in total. A plus B, A is also raw material, B is also raw material. The sum total of units which I am consuming on account of A and B is 1000. And the proportion, if I look, 600 and 400. I'm just taking an example. 600 and 400. Whereas ideally you are supposed to use 50-50, that is 500 and 500. So what we do here for computing the revised standard quantity, we take actual quantity, that is 1000, and we simply apply the standard ratio, standard mix of these two material. Standard mix is 50-50. So I would say revised standard quantity for A is 500 and for B also it is 500. Whereas actually what we did, we used 600 and 400, which means there is a variation of mix in there is a mix variance, because as per standards we are supposed to use both the products, both the materials in equal proportion, but actually we are not using them in equal proportion, and that actually becomes a reason for variance. So what we are doing here, we have to actually apply the standard mix or the ratio of the standard ratio of raw materials which are used for production into the actual units consumed. So I have to simply explain it like this, that if I have to compute revised standard quantity, I am applying standard proportion of different types of raw material into actual units consumed. This is one way of understanding revised standard quantity, and that you can also apply for computing. The simplest definition of RSQ or revised standard quantity is that we are applying standard ratio of raw material used into the actual units consumed. Whatever actual units are consumed, you have to simply apply the standard ratio of different types of material. If there are two types of material, the ratio of A and B, if I'm using A and B, the ratio of A and B is going to be used for calculating revised standard quantity, and actual quantity remains the same as reported in the question, and standard price is also the same as reported in the question. So with this understanding of RSQ, let's understand how to calculate RSQ by a formula. If you look at the formula, how to calculate RSQ. Since I have told you about the formula of material mix variance, now the next step is to calculate RSQ. For RSQ, in most of the textbooks you will find this formula which I am going to show here also, so that you should not have any kind of confusion that sir has not quoted that formula. Although I don't suggest to use that formula, it is because it creates confusion. In place of that, you can simply take up actual quantity and find out the ratio of different types of material, apply them into the actual units consumed, so that you can compute RSQ. Although in this particular numerical problem, I am using the formula which is given into most of the textbooks, but alternatively you can apply the idea, the suggestion which I am giving here for this particular computation of RSQ. So let's have a look at the formula. For RSQ, the formula is total actual quantity divided by total standard quantity into standard quantity of given material. Suppose if I'm talking about two types of raw materials, that is A and B. So whatever the specific material for which I am computing RSQ, that will be the value here, standard quantity of material A, if I'm computing the value of the RSQ for material A. So it is very simple, total actual quantity divided by standard quantity into standard quantity of material. Try to understand what we are doing. We are doing the same thing, but with the help of a formula. We are finding the ratio between the total actual quantity and the total standard quantity, and then whatever ratio comes, it is multiplied with the standard quantity of the specific material for which I am computing RSQ. So whichever specific raw material for which I am computing RSQ, that will actually be multiplied with the ratio. And the same can be done with my suggestion, which I told you at the very outset. RSQ for material A alternatively can be total actual quantity into standard ratio of material A. I'll hint you about this way of computing RSQ in this numerical problem which I'm going to take up. In the next numerical problem which I am going to take up, where you can understand how to calculate the RSQ for different types of material. So the crux of the story is that for computing material mix variance, we are coming across a new term called revised standard quantity for which I have told you two different ways to calculate. One is the formula where you find the ratio between the actual quantity and standard quantity, and then it is multiplied with the standard quantity of specific material for which you are computing RSQ. The second is very simple, very easy to remember also. You take the total units of all different types of materials used for producing the given output. You take the total units consumed and you simply calculate the ratio of the standard ratio. You apply standard ratio into the total units which are consumed, as I exemplified at the very outset, and further I'll be computing it in the numerical problem. I'll be showing you how to apply that ratio. The standard ratio need to be applied into the actual quantity. So roughly speaking, you can say that revised standard quantity is nothing but applying the standard proportion of different types of raw material into the total units consumed, and that is why we are calling it revised standard quantity. It is your revised standard quantity, revision of standard into actual quantity. But remember, this is focusing on only one component, that is the mix of different types of material which you are using. Cause we have to calculate RSQ, we are being very specific to the computation that we have to calculate a revised standard quantity. So this is the point which you need to mind here for computing material mix variance. You have to calculate RSQ first, revised standard quantity first, and then for every type of material which you are using for producing the output, you have to compute RSQ for each of them and then simply apply it into the formula, that is revised standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price, to calculate material mix variance. After computing material mix variance, the next step to justify the usage variance is yield variance. When we are saying material yield variance, the students are actually getting skeptical about this term yield. What do we mean by yield? Yield means output or production. So remember, with the given level of input, there is always a standard output given by the production department, or you can say the department which is setting the standard is always giving you the ratio between the input and output. That if everything is normal, if other things remain equal, everything is going smoothly and properly, then with this level of input of raw material, we are supposed to get this level of output, and that is called your standard yield. Suppose I am saying that with the input of 1000 units of raw material, you are supposed to get output of 900 units. Then obviously this 900 unit is your standard yield. But what about the actual yield? Which means that standard yield is what? It is your standard production. So with the standard or with the given units of raw material, what should be my standard output? That is my standard yield. So you can say that standard production is now having a new name called standard yield. But remember, the actual yield is at times given in the question and at times you have to calculate. So while computing the yield variance, we are actually finding the difference between the standard and actual here also standard yield and actual yield. So you must be understanding, in the entire chapter of standard costing, we have to find out the difference between the standard yield, standard and actual. But remember, based on the type of computation you are dealing with, if you are talking about the price variance, you are finding the difference between the standard price and actual price. But if you are computing the usage variance, you are finding the difference between the standard usage and actual usage. And if I am computing the mix variance, I am talking about the standard and actual again. The only difference is we are using a new name called RSQ, or revised standard quantity. But if I am computing standard yield, then obviously standard yield minus actual yield. So everywhere we are finding the difference between the standard and actual, but based on the specific type of computation, we are using different terms, different you can say different components for the purpose of computing that. So after having the basic understanding of standard yield and actual yield, let's have a look at the formula of material yield variance. What is the formula for material yield variance? The formula is very simple. We have to first calculate the standard yield. And for the standard yield, if you wish to have a formula, the formula is actual quantity of material into standard output divided by standard quantity of material for actual output. Or you can say we are using a simple proportion here. If you look at the numerator, we are talking about actual quantity of material into standard output divided by standard quantity of material for actual output. So for actual output, what is my standard quantity of material which I'm supposed to use? I'm finding the ratio between the actual quantity of material and standard quantity of material, and then multiplying it with the standard output to arrive at standard yield. The next step is standard rate. Standard rate is what? It is my total standard cost divided by standard units which I have produced. That gives me the standard rate or standard price, you can say, for this particular product. Remember, it is for output. It is the only place where we are taking the standard rate or standard price of that particular product. We are not taking the price of raw material. Before this point, wherever we were computing, we were considering the standard price and actual price of material, whereas for this yield variance, we are taking the total cost, that is the standard cost, and we are dividing it by standard units which we have produced. So with this raw material of this formula, we are actually computing the ingredients of this formula. We have understood how to compute standard yield and standard rate. Once it is computed, the next step is to apply this in the formula. What is my formula for yield variance? It is standard yield minus actual yield. Whatever the difference is, that needs to be multiplied with the standard rate or cost, which I have just discussed how to calculate. So standard yield minus actual yield, remember, your actual yield may be greater than, equal to, or less than standard yield. If your actual yield is more than standard yield, then obviously it is favorable. If your actual yield is less than standard yield, then what will happen? Your actual yield is less than standard yield, which means you are running with the adverse situation. If your actual yield is equal to your standard yield, then there is no variance. So in this way, we have to calculate the material yield variance, which means I'm talking about the productivity of my department, that what is the input, whatever the input output relationship was, based on that, whether I have done justice to the standards or not, and if the variance is there, what is the extent of that variance. Remember, once we have computed the sum total of material usage variance, mix variance, and yield variance is supposed to be equal to material usage variance. So in this way, we have understood, we have actually discussed the formula of computing or justifying the usage variance by computing mix variance and yield variance. So let's recapitulate what we have understood. We have understood that material cost variance is actually the sum total of material price variance and usage variance. So it is justified by these two components, material price variance and usage variance. Once it is computed, we have to further justify the cost variance with the computation of price and usage. The formula is here. For cost variance, the formula is standard cost minus actual cost. Just for your remembrance, I'm showing the formula here. Just to have a recall of this particular formula. For price variance, the formula is standard price minus actual price into actual quantity. For usage variance, the formula is standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price. Once it is justified, the next step is you have to calculate, you have to justify the usage variance. For that, you have mix variance and yield variance. For yield variance, you know the formula, standard yield minus actual yield. We have just discussed standard yield minus actual yield into standard rate or standard cost. Material mix variance, for that the formula is revised standard quantity minus actual quantity into standard price. So revised standard quantity we have discussed, actual quantity also we have discussed, and then we have understood how to justify the cost variance by computing price and usage, and then further justifying the usage variance by computing the mix variance and yield variance. My dear students, I hope you must have understood the concept of material variance. In the next lecture of mine, I'll again continue our discussion on this topic of computation of mix variance and yield variance. I hope you must have enjoyed today's lecture of mine. Thank you so much.